Okay, so I've had a lot of requests for a video going over the Super Joule Ringer 3.0 and how to set it up, how to get it going. Um, I'm not going to go over the winding of the coil in this video. These coils are really straightforward. You just take, in this case, it looks like I have about I don't know, a 20 gauge enamel copper wire here. I wound the full length of this ferrite rod, came back over it with what looks to be a 14 gauge wire, but a lot of these variables you can adjust, and it depends on how many lights you want to connect. You know, if you're tuning a coil just to run one light bulb, you may want to build your coil a little differently. And I'll go over how I tune to get the optimum efficiency for whatever the load I'm designing for is. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and point out one of the steps where I think a lot of folks could be going wrong and getting themselves in trouble and maybe burning out their transistor. Anytime I get ready to experiment with a new circuit, especially the more sensitive ones like a crossover circuit, the first thing I do is I set my power supply to a voltage, in the case of a Joule Ringer 3.0, around 10 volts. And then I limit my current down here to say 100 milliamps or so. You don't want this current wide open, because if this is wide open and you have something hooked up wrong, you're definitely going to burn out your transistor. So go ahead and limit the current down. If you don't have a power supply, I'll show you another way to do this with a battery. I would try starting the Super Joule Ringer 3.0 with a 9-volt battery. And that way you will not be as likely to burn out your transistors if you connect this to a regular 12-volt battery or something that can really deliver a lot of amps. But anyway, we got that hooked up now. And we've got our circuit all set up here, and nothing's coming on. I can tap the wires around, you know, there's just no action whatsoever. If that's ever your problem, and you can also see, if I switch over here to the amp draw, that we're pulling no amps. So that's another thing I would always check. And you can check that again if you have a battery with a little ammeter in line. But we're pulling no amps and no action on the circuit. So the first thing I do when that happens is I come over here to my primary windings. This is the primary would be your larger windings here. And I just switch the connection on the primary windings. So all we're going to do is we're just going to reverse these connection, these wires. And you can see we got light. Another point where a lot of people could be going wrong, you may just need to reverse the connection here, folks. Alright, so we're pulling half an amp, and it's just screaming away. So, say you don't have a power supply, and you have to troubleshoot this same scenario. I'm going to go ahead and hook these back up like they were. So, I'm going to do this again, and this time I'm going to connect to a 9-volt battery, because maybe you don't have a power supply, but you don't want to blow out your transistor. This is just an old 9-volt battery I had laying on the shelf, and we'll go ahead and test with that one. So I'm going to connect to here. Okay, nothing's coming on, and as before, it's because this is on the primary, and I just need to flip these around. But I'm going to just point out one other thing. You could also flip around the connection on your secondary. It doesn't really matter if you flip the secondary or the primary. So in this case, we're going to change the connections on the secondary. And I'm going to do this on a different coil. I think this will be a lot easier for you all to see on a different coil. But there we go. We've got the light on our 9-volt battery. No chance of burning out our transistor. So then once you get the circuit working, then you can scale it up to larger loads, and you may need to mount the transistor on a heat sink, especially if you're running other types of bulbs. But okay, so just connected up to this one, and we've got our connection to the primary windings here and to the secondary windings, and I'm going to go ahead and hook up the battery. I don't know if this is oriented correctly or not yet, so let's just connect here. Okay, I'm not seeing any action on the circuit. So we can flip these two guys around, or we can do the two in the primary. In this case, I'm going to switch the primary connections around. So we'll just connect the yellow down here and the red up to here, and you can see the circuit came on. So that could be a major point of confusion if you're building a Super Joule Ringer 3.0 circuit. So keep that in mind. You may need to flip that around. Now I'm going to just show you guys how I tune these to get as much light as possible. Okay, just want to show you how I tune a Joule Ringer circuit here real quick. So I've got this coil set up. I just wound this, and I wound it with really soft, flexible silicone-coated RC hobby wire. This is the wire I use in my RC projects, and this wire you can get from Hobby King. The reason I use this when I'm tuning the circuit is I can wind and unwind the primary very easily. And once I figure out the right ratio, then I can replace it with some copper wire. But let's go ahead and connect up here. You can see the light comes on, but we're pulling. Let's see what the amperage we're pulling is. See, it doesn't even bump. And this is 0 to 2 amp. It's not even bumping it, and we're getting very little light. So what I need to do, I need to unwind some of these winds, and that's going to bump our light up and also increase our amp draw, and you'll find a sweet spot. So I'm going to go ahead and there's our brightness there. I'll just go ahead and take this and we'll unwind a few winds. And that's the beauty of using this type of wire, folks. You can really tune your coil easily, and that's really important. You really want to be able to adjust these winds on your primary versus your secondary to come up with something that works for what you need. And also what I do a lot of times, if I'm tuning to, say, 6 of these, then I connect 6 and I tune to that, because the whole secret to getting a really efficient Joule ringer is tuning the winding ratios to your load. So anticipate what your lighting load is going to be, and you'll want to wind to that load. So you can see I've undone some winds here. We're pulling maybe a tad more amperage, although it's still pretty much hanging at 0. So I'm going to go ahead and remove a bunch more, and we'll check again. Okay, you can see we're getting a lot brighter. The needle's still sitting on 0, but we're really starting to get some light out of the light bulb. So that's really the process of tuning. And at a certain point, you'll see the volt or the amperage draw just really start to increase, and that means you've gone too far. I had this coil testing earlier, and it was pulling 2 amps, and that may also be a situation in which folks are burning out their transistors. You know, their winding ratios may be way off. So yeah, I usually start with a lot of winds in my primary and work my way down. And then as I get, oh, you can see, we just hit the jump. So now we're pulling 1 amp, and we're getting a lot of light. So at this point, now that I've found the spot where this jumps and really comes on hot and bright, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to set up my light reader so I can read the lumens from this lamp. And I got a little lux meter here. I'll find that and we'll hook that up. And then I'm going to actually tune this to get the maximum amount of light versus amperage. So we want a small amount of amperage but a lot of light. Okay, so here's what I'm going to do to establish my baseline. So this is the most efficient inverter I've found for a small inverter. It's the one I use in the Soul-in-One version 3. And I've got it set here on my light meter, and I'm reading 320 on the 100 times lux. So that's the baseline. So if you look under version 3 of the Soul-in-One, you'll see that I've got the link to this watt meter. Really useful for experiments. Now the important thing to note is you have to feed into here at the source, and then instead of just connecting your load to your inverter or whatever, go through a fairly large electrolytic capacitor, and that will help you get a more accurate reading. So just something to take note, especially when you're trying to take readings on a Joule ringer device. It really helps you to get a much more accurate reading if you put the capacitor in line going down to your load. So anyway, this is our baseline. We're pulling 11.4 watts, and we're getting 315 on, or 316. Let's just say 315 on the light meter, and 11.5 watts. So that's where we're at, 315, 11.5 watts. Now we're going to connect up the Joule ringer, and we'll tune to try to beat this, inverter. Okay, so now we're running on the Joule ringer here that we're tuning. You can see that we're at 305 on the light meter, so almost the same light intensity. 305 to 315 is very close. We're going to go ahead and try to get above. But we're pulling 10 9.9 to 10 watts. So significant drop in wattage usage, and for almost the same light. Now I'm going to go ahead and see if I can't tune this and do even better. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to go ahead and disconnect this. We're going to undo a wind. We just want to at least hit the same light output that we were hitting with the other inverter, and also try to save as much wattage as we possibly can. So let's see what we get now. So now you can see we're at 315, so we're right at the baseline, and we're coming in here at 10.5 watts. So we're getting the same amount of light, and we're saving 1 watt. And in this case, I'm using a stranded wire, which does not function as well. And this should be replaced with solid copper wire. But beyond that, I've only spent, I don't know, 3-4 minutes tuning this to really come up with a nice coil like one of these that will just totally smoke an inverter. I do a fair amount of tuning. I'll usually tune one of these things for, I don't know, 15-20 minutes. And you can't just adjust the primary winds. When you're tuning for efficiency, you have to adjust the number of secondary versus primary, and I haven't really been doing that here. But what I'm going to do now at this point to try to bring my efficiency or my watt load down even more is I'm going to begin to tweak the secondary winds versus the primary winds. It's going to take a little longer, but we're going to get this to a whole nother level of efficiency.